I think the sense of power everyone felt on that day and inspiration was that they can't afford to start this war with this level of opposition. I think we felt in the majority and we felt very strong, and it made it so clear when you saw those millions of people marching on the streets around the world that this was a completely illegitimate war. I think everyone thought that at the time.
I didn't know all the terms back then, like civil disobedience. I didn't know any of those terms, but it seemed such a natural thing to want to break out of the normal routine, which is, go to school Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, well, whatever it is. Because this felt like such a big thing. It was the biggest, political thing to have happened in my life.
I remember I was in my politics lesson and it was before the strikes, and I stood up in front of my class. I said, listen, if you want a real politics lesson, get your asses out onto that demonstration, because there is nothing better than actually getting onto the demonstration and being involved in politics in life. Actually get involved in politics. Don't sit here and read it out of a textbook. Go and learn about it. Be part of it. Be part of changing the world. Be part of changing history. Be part of politics.
Too young to vote, but politically savvy enough to identify the point of maximum impact in publicity terms for their anti-war message. These London school students staged sit-down protests at Westminster and laid siege to the gates of Downing Street, causing police to close off Whitehall to passing traffic.
People that oppose the war, it's really, really good.
This is both legitimate and, we're showing concern for this political issue, which is highly contentious, and our education too.
The Stop the War coalition came up with the idea only last week, but the message spread fast across the country. These pupils in Cambridge among the first into action this morning, along with others in Birmingham and around Britain, all determined to show the government that resistance is blooming among the next generation of voters. Jake Lynch, BBC News.
Iraq was in the news and there was an undertone, a kind of a threat of war. And really, a lot of my school friends now, we were quite concerned about it.
Making the transition from someone sitting in front of the television and sort of barking at the television and actually going onto a demonstration was just that out of frustration, because we were like, what can we do? We can't just sit here and do nothing about it while innocent people are being slaughtered or going to be slaughtered.
My life did change at that point. Because I used to kind of do dance lessons on Saturdays and stuff, and I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore because I wanted to help out with my local Stop the War group.
We all went up to these meetings in London just to because it was more exciting than what was happening in Cambridge, actually.
Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, Birmingham, everywhere came to this meeting, and we discussed what our plan of action would be, what we wanted to do.
I think we all had to stand up and say what we were going to do in our college, and everyone was getting up and saying, well, we've got this strike organised, and it came to our turn, and I think we were just too embarrassed to say that we hadn't got anything planned. So Ed stood up and was like, yeah, we're going on strike as well. And so then we were like, well, we can't just not now that we've said that.
And that's when we came to the conclusion that yes, we would choose to go on strike. We chose our dates. We had delegates from all over the country. We had people, and then they would go to other schools in their area, and they would contact other people they knew, and that's how it spread.
We were very, very tentative about it, and we thought what we'd do is we'd go around with sort of petitions, and we'd sort of wander around the college at break times, and we were telling everyone, we'd like you to sign this if you think it's a good idea to go on strike about the war, but we're not going to go on strike unless we get 200 people to sign this bit of paper. We got our 200 names something like the night before, and we're like, oh, right, that means we've got to go on strike tomorrow.
Earlier, the school children and students had stopped the traffic in Parliament Square. While their elders argue about the need for a second resolution, they are purely and simply against war.
There was fewer than 5 of us initially, kind of taking those first steps up the hill out of the school, and eventually, all the other kids, having seen the handwritten posters around the school, in the toilets and on the walls, although obviously they'd all been ripped down by teachers, pretty much all the kids in the playground started running after us. I remember my form tutor was running after me, you know, kind of saying, Alice, we'll talk about this, just stay in school, you know, as if, you know, it was something personal between her and me, but, you know, we just ignored her and we had our placards and we walked out of school, and we got out the gates, and eventually they started closing and locking the gates, and my stepbrother actually, who, you know, he was kind of, we'd tried to we didn't really organise anything, but we tried to kind of, I don't know, agitate, I suppose, or we were the ones putting posters up. He actually got carried back into school. My little brother, he actually, after they'd locked the gates, he climbed over the gates to join us, and some of the other younger kids did that as well. And we got out into the park outside school, you know, and kind of, all right, so that's behind us. And we weren't quite sure, right, what are we going to do now? Where are we going to go? How do we even get to Parliament Square, you know?
I think it was a couple of hundred.
From your college?
From our college. We were then joined by maybe just slightly less from Long Road. And we converged on this big sort of... we were told, we'd promised the headmaster that there'd be no picket line outside the college, which was a small lie, because there was. We had a languages teacher who said to the students who came in when we were on this picket line outside the school, any students that came into her room, she told them they were scabs and they ought to be outside, and she was going to refuse to teach them.
We got in contact with the school up the road, and we, you know, decided to meet up with them in the town centre, and it was amazing. They managed to get about 300 kids out, I think, and, you know, they'd already blocked the road, they'd already, you know, caused havoc in the town centre.
We started to march into town. We marched over the big bridge over the railway, and a huge policeman stood in the middle of it and sort of said, "Stop!" And being political, like the idiot, I stopped to talk to him while everybody else just completely ignored it, which was the biggest mistake, and said, "Oh, well, this is a spontaneous march, this is completely legal." And he was saying, "Well, we've just told you not to march into town." And I was saying, "Well, it's not up to me, it's not my decision." And then I gave him my name, which was a bit stupid as well, and carried on marching with everybody else. And so they were like, "Oh, we're arresting you as well." So we got stuck in a police van. And then Ed said, "Well, now we're going to go and march to the police station." And then they arrested Ed. So really by then, kind of the two people who'd been leading it had been arrested. And what happened after that was just really, really fantastic, and kind of, I think, shows how empowered people felt. They all marched to outside the police station, regardless of the fact they were now just arresting people for saying that. And they did a huge sit-down protest outside the police station.
We went down to Parliament Square, and it was amazing. Thousands of school students, you know, and I remember we kind of bought our T-shirts. Some of us had banners that we'd kind of made earlier on in the week. It felt like rebellion, I suppose. You know, people kind of had messed up their school uniform. I remember seeing kids with paint all over their school uniform. It was really creative.
We're saying it is 20 million people. It's 23 million people, but she did it wrong.
Yeah. What do you think of today then?
It's going good. It needs to happen more often. More people. At school, the teachers wouldn't let anyone out. The only people who got out were the people that could climb over fences. And now we're suspended.
I was excluded internally for a week, so I wasn't allowed to go to my lessons, which felt terribly ironic because, you know, we sort of, part of the reason we were being excluded was because we'd missed lessons, and then they were kind of enforcing me missing my lessons. You know, I had to literally just sit in an office.
I was arrested for intention to cause harm to people and property, which was a bit rich. My dad tried to come and see me in the cells, but which the police didn't tell me, actually. They didn't tell me until I'd been released, which I was in there for hours, I don't know, 7.5 hours, but they didn't say my dad had come or anything. And yeah, they'd cooked me like a nice little tea when I came home, like this, like almost like it was a birthday. It was like, "Oh, well done, that was really good." So I was incredibly lucky. I know some people's parents weren't that enamoured of the fact they'd been nicked.
Some of the teachers did kind of privately say to me at that point, "Oh yeah, I support what you did, really, you know, good on you, you know."
And that was the other thing as well, actually, because the first time that we went out on strike, there was definite opposition from the headmaster. There was real, we used to have to go in for almost weekly meetings, basically. And by the second strike, when war broke out, we did the strike at lunchtime. And there were a huge amount of teachers who'd come up to us and said they wanted to be on it and they wanted to come on the march. And some of them did, which was absolutely fantastic. And I don't think we would have got that level of confidence either from teachers or from other school students, especially at secondary schools, had we not done the first strike.
What is your aim? I mean, Tony Blair seems absolutely resolute in his aim. What are you actually trying to achieve here?
We're just trying to make sure that this war doesn't happen because we don't want it. 80% of the population doesn't want this, and we're trying to reflect that. And we're going to do that by direct action because 2 million people turned up on February the 15th to march against this war, and we weren't listened to. So now we're going to take direct action, and we're going to bring the country to a halt until he does listen.
And can we expect another protest amongst school students on this level?
Yes, I definitely think there will be. I think on a bigger level, on the day if we do go to war, we're going to make sure that students from every single school in the country go out to protest against this.
On the day that war broke out, Ed phoned me as soon he'd stayed up to hear when it was going to happen, and that was horrible because none of us wanted it to happen. We thought that the first strike would have been enough, then we thought February the 15th would have been enough, and it was such a heartbreaking disappointment that morning.
I remember on March 19th going to school, and then a whole load of us meeting up. We were all sort of shouting in the corridors, and it was all a bit crazy. We all met up, we left school. It's a bit of a blur, but I remember coming out of Westminster Station and just like nearly collapsing because it was just so amazing. There were thousands of students just there with their placards, screaming, shouting, surrounded by police. And me and my friends were like, right, let's get in there.
Although in the morning everyone had felt so dejected and depressed that war had broken out, by this time people felt so empowered. It was like, there's something we can do about this. There were samba bands that came down, there was loads of chanting. More school students started to join us from all the different schools.
We did a roadblock, and the police came and they basically crushed us up against a wall, I think. I mean, they have these really bizarre tactics as well of lifting people up. I think they like pinch them in the most painful places and throwing people around and threatening them.
And then the police turned up and said, well, this is not acceptable. When it was clear we weren't going to move, they just came in with batons and they dragged people off. It was really, really unpleasant. Nose rings were pulled out, eyebrow rings were pulled out. You could see people literally being whacked against the pavement.
I don't know what they'd been told, but they were the most violent I've ever seen them.
A lot of people thought, oh, will they just arrest the ringleaders? But when it was just happening randomly to anyone, that was really, really shocking.
At that time I thought they were there to protect me or, protect individual citizens, but obviously not. That's not what they were there for. They were there to protect the state. They were there to protect the interests of the state.
There was a real sense of, not just of community, but of a real resistance to everything that was happening at the time. Not just the war, but the fact that the police had been so brutal in attacking these peace protesters. There was a real feeling of outrage that this has happened to us.
Because there are plenty of people, as you say, who might think, what a fantastic excuse just to walk out of the classroom, get out of a day's schooling and just go and join your mates during a protest. Just using the protest as a cover.
Yeah, no, I'd completely refute that because we were there with a passion. People were there. I mean, if they wanted to bunk off, they wouldn't have turned up at Parliament with their banners waving, saying, we don't want this oil, we don't want this war for oil.
Nationally, it did feel quite hostile and was really trivialising the movement and saying that it was just, a lot of young people who just wanted a day out, that this was kind of a very childish response to some big, important political decision that really they shouldn't be interfering with.
If you were just someone who just turned the TV on, who looked outside on the day when the strikes were happening, it could seem, yes, this is very spontaneous, people have just decided, but nothing comes out of nowhere. There has to be something that puts that idea in people's heads, to make them go on that strike, to give them that incentive to go on the strike. You're told, oh, students aren't political, they're so apathetic, particularly this generation. And it turned out to be a load of rubbish.
Why are you here?
To protest against the war. I don't think Iraq should be bombed, just said out. I don't think Iraq, the innocent people, should be killed.
Yeah. So how do you feel this school students' protest? Do you think there's a lot of support for it?
There is a lot of support. There's a lot of support, yeah.
Well, the only person that's not recognising is Tony Blair.
Because American last us, they used to play uranium bombs, and there's deformed babies being born every day now, and people are traumatised, and this got to stop. It's our war, it's got to stop, another thing. These policemen, yeah, they might seem like all smiley. I was out there, yeah, I got dragged, yeah, and they proper hurt me. It's like they might be all smiley. They're not smiling, they're proper digging into you. They're digging into you, seriously. And the girl got twisted, like, she must have had an earring when she got twisted.
Has it put you off demonstrating this?
No, it hasn't.
It's just made us stronger.
It's what?
It's just made us stronger.
Made us stronger. Right, that's against human rights. They've got no right to do that to people, yeah, because we're here for peaceful purposes. Okay, we're more peaceful than they are.
This wouldn't have happened if I was a weapons inspector.
That's right.
Excellent.
Don't they understand what it must feel like to be, how scary it would be to be a 15-year-old girl being dragged by her hair from, you know what I mean, from sitting down in central London, which is perfectly legal. We're meant to live in a democracy, aren't we?
I think people have to listen, and when enough people like this come out and protest, and I think eventually people will see that this war is not going to be as easy as they think it is, and public opinion will melt, and if Tony Blair doesn't listen, he will go, and that's the end of it, really. You know?
We are the next electors, so when we vote, he will be gone, full stop, and if you can get all the young people out, Blair's got no chance.
This was one of the cards that was sent from one of the younger kids. Do you want to read it? On the camera? Yeah. To Alice, I want to properly say thank you for really being brave and looking after us all last week. Everyone, especially me, really admires you because you're more prepared to stand up and fight for what you believe in than anyone I know. Most people who are anti-war just take a back seat, but you're prepared to actually do something about it. More people should try to be brave like you and be brave and stand up for peace. Love from Martha.
I think what we saw with the school student strikes was a huge amount of the leaders, I think a majority of the leaders and organisers of it, if you like, were very young women, and a lot of them were Muslim. Young women are told that they're not really leaders in today's society. So really when they started to lead walkouts, they were really saying something quite different and, really not relying on very much tradition, I think, which perhaps makes them more radical.
I definitely became a more confident and more political person as well. You know, it went beyond just being against the Iraq War. It became about actually we need to challenge the way that we're represented. You know, the way that our democracy works. Being part of the anti-war movement was my A-levels. It was my university. It was my education. You know, and I've learnt far more from that. And I know I have from all my years at school. I've learnt far more from my few years being involved in the anti-war movement than anything else.
It was the day that radicalised me. I realised that nothing that teachers or parents or other adults or the press, because we had some pretty slandering press locally, nothing they could say could change what I was thinking in my head or, indeed what I was physically doing, in terms of working out or blocking a road or whatever. And I think they could sense that. They were a bit worried, I suppose, that, I kind of broken that kind of, I don't know, kind of like a fear of God or whatever, fear of, kind of godly authority.
I think the government know that young people don't accept their authority, that they're very bolshy and very cynical about the government. And I think that's partly explains the attacks that we see on young people today. They're telling people that young people are apathetic and they don't care about the rest of the world is kind of perhaps how they'd like it to be.
Personally, sometimes I feel actually quite disillusioned and quite disenchanted, and I feel a bit like, I gave up 3 years of my life. I could have been getting A's in my A-levels, I could have been here, I could have been doing this. And that's because I gave it up to be part of the anti-war movement. And was it worth it? Did it change anything? And I do have that debate with myself sometimes, but usually the idea that actually, no, it did have an impact, and it has. And it's something that will go on beyond just not being able to stop the Iraq War. Because actually, think about if they do even dare try and attack Iran, we can mobilise all of that again, without a doubt.
Because I was political before, I was thinking about all these ideas about revolution, about people having the capacity on their own to change the world. And it's very difficult to believe that until you see some of it in practice. And I suppose when war broke out, you really saw people change just in a few hours, because they were with so many other people and they felt that they had something to say. You know, all these people who'd never really been asked their opinion about the war. There'd never been a vote on the war. These are people too young to vote anyway. They'd never voted in this government. And they felt strong enough not only to resist the police, but also to get up and say things, to phone their friends, to invite them to come along, to win arguments with them and tell them why this was so important. And in that sense, I suppose, you really start to believe that ordinary people can change the world.